My name is Dina Aspen, and I'm an associate professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Ålesund. I met some of you before, but in the context of this project, I'm fairly new. So my campus is part of NTNU that you all know very well, but our particular role in this project is to support Ålesund municipality in working with them as a case. So some of the things that we do in my group is to also look at how various tools are, potentially creating some value in decision-making processes and policy-making and planning. So although we're not a technical or technology provider in Revalue, we've connected with these group of people because we do see some interesting connections that could be gained if we kind of try to pull our tools together. So this concept that I am talking about is about livability, and I think it was Marjan that maybe mentioned something earlier today in Kristen's presentation about cyclability and walkability, and this is also, concepts that very often are used alongside livability, and it's actually where some of this work that we've done started. It was started to look at, how is it to move around as a pedestrian in this urban environment? But before I continue with this presentation, I actually would like to ask you to write in the chat what you think livability is in a city, because it's a very broad concept, so it would be nice to know where you come from. So it says, without any hurry makes it livable. Green spaces, low traffic, more cycling, triggers emotions. Interesting. Safe. Okay. Thank you so much. Very interesting. And these replies are all flowers and mushrooms. Absolutely makes everything livable. What's interesting is that these replies are very well aligned to how livability also has been treated, both in practice and in research. It has to do with all of these qualities that are important to people, and that help them, feel that they are safe, that they are thriving. It could be aesthetic factors. It could be, physical infrastructures that helps humans move around and, have access to various services in society. So this is a very long definition that I've provided on this slide, but it just shows that there are, a lot of elements, a lot of factors that goes into this idea of livability. And it's been increasingly, becoming more and more popular in the context of urban planning and design. And on the right-hand side, you see the front page of a global livability index, which is computed every year. It's an annual report. And it's interesting because Sangnik had an example from Vienna looking at vulnerabilities. And here you can see that Vienna is also in 2023 is considered the most livable city in Europe. So, and I think it's also obtained this status before. And this particular approach that is deployed here in this review that is done of cities in Europe is very much based on quantitative and qualitative data, and it's a score for the entire city. I say Europe, but this is the global one, I'm sorry. But it shows that there's a lot of information that goes into informing, whether a city is livable. And, there's a lot of data used for this, but also expert judgment is applied. Interviews are conducted and so on. So it's a very time-consuming, process to arrive at the score. And it's, interesting to see it, but it's also very important to be able to translate this information to something actionable for planners, for instance, to know something about these qualities in a higher resolution than just getting a score for the entire city. And so this is what we've been working with in NTNU. There are many interesting scientific communities and again, consultancies and others that are approaching this idea of livability in different manners. And in our projects, we've tried to sort of find the domains that we find very useful to assess and kind of lump or bundle certain qualities. So you have the obvious ones, which are infrastructure and safety and employment and housing, which are basic needs. It's very important to be able to have those things. But then there's also accessibility to other services in society and just general qualities and factors in the environment that provide some sense of safety and belongingness, and even social cohesion is a very important concept within livability. And you all wrote very different replies here, and I'm sure that for each person, livability is something very unique, and even for each individual, it could be unique or change over time. It could even change depending on form of the day, what you feel you need today. So it's a highly subjective concept. And this is very important because, again, it is possible, obviously, to score a city on an aggregate level to say, this is how livable it is. But it's probably, more nuanced than this. People have different needs. They have different life situations, different lifestyles, different preferences. So all of this needs to somehow be handled when we're talking about livability. It's a subjective concept. So when we built this tool that I'm going to show you very briefly, there are a lot of user inputs that are required to actually perform the assessment, the spatial livability assessment. And the first part is really about, well, what are the factors that you think are important? You need to pick out those factors. It could be all of the factors. It doesn't really, there's no limitation, but in any event, that's one of the user inputs that we are asking for. And the other input is also, well, now that you have these particular factors that you've decided to include in kind of your assessment of livability, what are your preferences? And by preferences, we could talk about certain constraints relative to the qualities, that there are certain requirements or particular ideas about how something should be. And in preferences, we also include the relative importance of those factors. So you may say that, well, I think having access to parks and green areas is important, but I think it's far more important to have a very easy access to, for instance, health services. So you could weigh those things relative to each other to kind of perform some aggregate sense of livability. So the tool or tool set, I would rather say it's a tool set, because what we've developed is a generic indicator assessment platform, which builds on openly accessible data. It's very flexible, so we could also combine this with local data, for instance, coming from a municipality or other repositories or data providers. It's more conceptual in a sense as a tool. It's not strictly dedicated to one or other type of application or so. It's just an open platform. And on this platform, we can build applications that performs indicator-based assessment and visualizes in a spatial display, map-based display, how these various qualities are distributed more or less, and also how they compute or compose some sense of livability given the subjective inputs from the users. This is a very early interface, so I don't want you to get caught up in exactly how the interface looks, but I'm going to show you this video that at least shows, like, roughly speaking, how the tool workflow is. So in this demo, it says walkability, but it's where it came from, it's livability. And it's actually very fast, but you can see that you can pick the various indicators that you want to include. So, there are different elements that you want to have in there. And in this case, 6 various indicators are included, and you could also on the right-hand side here specify the weights, so you can assign some number of relative importance, and this will all be normalized in the tool, and this makes it possible to aggregate, so to compute like some final score of livability. And then you define the area that you're interested in, and then you can also fetch the score based on your particular preferences. So you can see here it's, again, it's a very early version, so the visual part is looking very different now, but it shows them the areas that have good or green livability or red livability, which is bad, and then you have yellow, which is somewhere in between. And I'll show some other displays later on, but this is essentially what the tool does. Now, since it is subjective, what's interesting here is that for the same area, you will have potentially very different viewpoints on whether it's livable. And this is an example that we've just taken from a test that we did with Ålesund municipality, where we did some looking at literature and essentially just providing some like hypothetical ideas about what could be interesting to a certain group in society, because we have different demographies. And even within demographies, there are huge individual varieties. But if we just take an easy example here, you can say that children and elderly living in the same area may assess the same area very differently. And this is an area which is interesting because Ålesund as a municipality is very polycentric. So we have multiple areas that provide a lot of services. We have the city center, we have MUA, which is another big area or site where a lot of development has taken place, and there's a lot of shops and buildings there. But what we see over time is that the places between these centers are also being developed, and they're being developed in an incremental way where slowly you're kind of developing that land, you're adding new buildings, and sometimes they're not intentionally designed always, they just happen. They're organically, they evolve. So we took one of those areas that you can see on this map that kind of lies in the middle between two very important centers in Ålesund. And we looked at, well, what type of qualities does it offer? Is it really useful for the different demographies living here? So here's an example then, that children, obviously they want to be mobile, they want to be able to, in an area with a lot of road infrastructure, they want to be able to easily move around. So crosswalk distance is important. Being able to go or have access to certain services within a certain distance is important. Kristin mentioned the 10-minute city. Children walk not so far in 10 minutes, so you can have very strict constraints on the distance to very important services to them: parks, playgrounds, schools, and so on. We did the same for elderly, and they have other struggles or other let's say preferences in their everyday life. Being able to go to a grocery store is very important because if that store is too far away, the level of physical exercise drops significantly because they end up either not going, having someone go for them, or use some motorized vehicle to get there. So the location of certain services that they use frequently need to be close enough. I think 500 to 700 meters is a typical example of that. And it greatly improves quality of life and health. So these things are useful to consider. So in terms of use cases, now this tool is very new. We just developed it, and we haven't, we've only used it in demo-like situations, but we're very interested to deploy this in Livevalue. You can see the interface here. We have a desktop application where you as a user can essentially pick your factors, maybe add some constraints to those factors. You can specify your weights, and then you can generate various map displays of livability. And the usefulness of this is, first of all, to do a screening. So you can go quality by quality and look at how that quality is distributed and where it is, and how well it is. And this means that you can look at, pedestrian infrastructure as a separate concept. You can look at health services. You can look at, layers and layers of the existence of various factors in the urban environment. You can also see whether something is missing. So those are, initial, ways of using such a tool to just screen an area. But then you can also ask more, let's say, advanced questions. So, well, how do they really combine to form livable areas? And are the areas where people currently live livable? You can also start matching those qualities against demographies or groups of citizens that, may either be located there or you want them to, be located there. And obviously, the question is, are we, as a municipality or as a city or, any scale of planning, are we providing the qualities that are necessary? So these are various inferences that could be made, departing from just a very simple tool. And I also think because of the simplicity here and the way it's customized, or like it permits users to add, and define, what's important to them. It has a good potential for stakeholder engagement. It's pedagogically fairly simple to grasp as a concept, and the interface is also very simple. And because of the way that it's constructed, there's no, simulation time. It takes 5 seconds or 10 essentially to extract the results. So it's very easy to use in sessions when you want to work with various citizens. Another interesting concept here, this is where it all departed from, it was walkability, because we were interested in qualities that increases or enhances pedestrian activity. And it was because we were working with OSC on mobility, so we wanted to look at all kinds of mobility. And from that, we actually, again, this is the same platform, but if you as a user have particular preferences, you could use this tool to say, well, okay, if I want to go from A to B and I want to, I really like parks and I don't like roads with the high speed, because it scares me a bit and it's noisy, then, you can essentially define this in this app, and then you can get a route from A to B based on your preferences. And as you can see, this is also a mobile display. So the platform is very generic. We can have multiple clients, working on top of on the structure that we have. So we have a desktop app, which is 2D or 3D. We can show results in tiles or lines. So especially for walkability, it's interesting to see, certain qualities distributed on the pedestrian and road network. We have a mobile application. So again, it has all the same services or functionalities, but it's probably not something you want to use for spatial planning, but you could use it to engage citizens in spatial planning, for instance, because it also has this ability to just perform the assessment. And then we have what it says integrated 3D. So we have a 3D view where what we've tried to do is to see, can we combine livability, this model, with other aspects? And we already did, in fact, with OSC, with Kristin, where we simulated mobility, but then we also added and displayed results from livability in the same environment. So that's useful because sometimes you want to have the same interface, even if the information comes from different models. Here's another example of an implementation. So we have from a separate project, which is called Dark, which is about light design in after dark environments. So this is a digital twin customized or tailored very much to look at light and how it is distributed spatially, how vegetation influences the way light looks. And ultimately, this project wants to look at light as a factor of how it influences the life of both humans as well as animals and insects. Particularly, insects could be, and some animals could be prone to have, to be a bit disoriented, especially in after dark environments. I'm in the northern parts of Europe. So this shows, all the various functionalities and displays that the tool has for light design, and actually light design was added as a factor in livability or walkability. So you can again open the model to include new factors depending on the environment that you want to explore livability within. So it's the lower right-hand side shows a pedestrian path that they assessed around this lake, and they wanted to see, how is it initially? So what is the ground? Is it, the elevation, the ground surface texture, all of these things, as well as light. So it was an interesting way of, using the model in a new context to say more than just, each model did separately. There's a lot of people who work to develop this, and it's a very simple and open platform. So this slide has some pointers to where you can find more details about this. I don't want to spend more time on that, but yeah. And before I move on to say a little bit about how these tools, all that have been presented today, could be deployed in Revalue, I guess we could do some questions if there are any questions.